and welcome to episode 45.
How's things going over there, Robert?
Oh, pretty good, thank you. In the last episode, I mentioned that we were going to take a trip to Japan, so
Hmm.
that's all been organised and booked all the accommodation and everything. So I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by the cost of the accommodation. It was actually quite reasonable in Tokyo. There seems to be
Hmm.
a lot of competition, and we're also spending a few days in Hiroshima.
Hmm.
And again the accommodation was about the same actually. So
Yeah.
yeah, and the bullet train takes about 4 hours apparently, and yeah, I think it was about
Hmm.
30 Australian, 140 Australian dollars or something along those lines
Uh-huh.
for a one-way trip for a person. So yeah, it seems quite reasonable, which is really good.
Hmm. That's awesome. Yep.
I've got a couple of things to talk about. So one is women's prisons. And the other is the Museum of Old and New Art, better known as MONA, which is a very well-known private art gallery in Australia. So I don't know if you've been following this, Vernon, with women's prisons, but there's been a push for quite a while now to abolish women's prisons.
They have been. Yeah.
Yeah, and it started as a bit of a radical idea but the UK seems to be the centre of it. They seem to be leading it. I've checked, and there are some people talking about it in Australia too. And I actually don't know about the US. I suspect not. But the UK is where it's really happening at the moment. Is where it's really at. So in 2007, there was actually a major study that was commissioned by the government, and it was run by Baroness Corsten. And this study actually recommended closing women's prisons in the UK. At the time, it was a pretty radical idea, and it's been mentioned off and on again in the UK ever since. But I've just noticed in the last few months that it's really picking up, and I actually think this time they might really try it.
Right.
So, yep. Uh, we've got so there was an article in the Guardian in July, and one reporter said women's prisons have served their time; they should be abolished.
Okay.
And
So certain women have served their time. They should be abolished so there could be no more incarceration ever.
yes, so they're saying that there will be no more women's prisons. Some of the proposals, I think the one in 2007 proposed that maybe keeping one women's prison open for, a small number of women who might be completely uncontrollable. Now, interestingly enough, though, in the 2007 study, they suggested shutting down the women's prisons, but one of the things they pointed out is they could be repurposed to men's prisons.
Hmm.
Isn't that
Yeah, we
nice?
we did we did talk about that, I think,
We did talk
before.
about that. Exactly.
Mhm.
That's right. So since then, that was a while back, but since then it's picked up again.
Mhm.
Now, the Justice Secretary in the UK is a woman by the name of Shabana Mahmood, and she believes that prison isn't working for women and is apparently really quite serious about pushing forward with this. So before the last couple of months, I didn't think it was a realistic prospect that they would really try to close prisons just for women. But my opinion on it has changed. I think they're really going to go for it in the UK now. So, and the real concern is that where one of the wealthy English-speaking countries go, the others soon follow. So if they start closing down women's prisons in the UK, you can expect we'll start seeing it in other similar countries.
Okay. Well, if this happens, then in those jurisdictions, in those local areas, best advice is to trust no woman.
Mm. Well, I mean, at what point do we start seeing men leave? I mean, we already see a lot more men leave Western countries than women, but we
Yeah.
might see a real uptick actually in that.
Mhm.
Also, to another aspect is some of these countries allow gender to be reassigned,
Mhm.
legally with nothing more than a signature. In which case, you
Right.
might simply see a bunch of men go and become women if
Right.
they were facing imprisonment, for example.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, one of the articles I read on this recently interviewed a woman by the name of Scarlett Roberts. Now, Miss Roberts was in prison for 4 months for, and I find this
Mhm.
absolutely astounding, perverting the course of justice. Perverting the course of justice is an extremely serious offence. And the fact that she was imprisoned for only 4 months is extraordinary. And I think I do believe a man who had committed perverting the course of justice would likely expect more than a 4-month sentence, even if there were some mitigating factors, and even if it was at the lower end. That's because the justice system has to rely on the integrity. Perverting the course of justice threatens the system itself, and so the system has traditionally been very harsh on it. So I found it absolutely extraordinary that somebody would get 4 months for perverting the course of justice.
Right. Yeah, that is
So
pretty ridiculous. Yeah.
it is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. Now, for myself, I actually think the prisons don't actually work that well as a whole, right? So, for example, there are obviously people who are uncontrollable, violent criminals, and so forth, who you've got nothing, you've
Oh
really
yeah.
got no option but to lock them up.
Hmm.
But for a lot of other people, I suspect it's not a very effective solution to the problem. It's also not very old, so a lot of people don't know that. The idea of imprisoning someone as a form of punishment is relatively new. It's only a few centuries old.
Hmm.
Generally, what you would do is you would imprison someone so they couldn't run away before you
Yeah.
punish them. It could be whipping or branding or whatever it happened to be, right?
Hmm.
They
Yep.
just, yeah, the purpose of a prison was to lock someone up so so they were physically restrained. But yeah, the idea of it actually being of imprisonment being the punishment is actually relatively new. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I guess where I'm going with that is if they were talking about prison reform on the whole, I would actually be agreeing with that and saying, yes, we should be looking at why the prisons aren't achieving their aims, and why people who leave prison have higher, in general, have higher reoffence rates than people who don't, and so forth. But
Yeah.
they're not doing that. They're just talking about getting rid of women's prisons.
Right, right, exactly. It's the one-sidedness that we're calling out here.
Exactly.
But yeah, but more to your point. Yeah, I can understand like the ineffectiveness of prisons, and also the fact that there are imprisonments for bad reasons.
Yeah,
Like
that's
it
a big
like
part of it.
yeah, exactly. And it's weird because more and more men are being imprisoned for victimless crimes and a more ridiculous Trump like sort of made up things that keep on compounding. We're going to be if things going the way they are now, we're going to see a lot more imprisonments of men for more ridiculous reasons, and then we're talking about remove like re the removal of women's prisons. So this
Yeah.
is quite uh, out of hand.
It absolutely is. Now, in the US in particular, this exists in other countries too, but I do think it is most severe in the US. There's a real problem with the prison industry, I think, where you have people going through the system and basically, it's essentially funding a system. The men are essentially being pushed into the system, and it's funding this machine. And also to a related problem was, of course, a bit topical when Kamala, and we have mentioned this before, when Kamala Harris was Attorney General in California, her department, there's some question about whether she knew about it or not, but my view is as the head of the department, she should have known about every major initiative, or if she didn't, that's incompetence. But
Yes.
while she was the Attorney General, they seriously looked at the possibility of keeping men in prison in California so they could be used as cheap labor to fight fires.
Uh-huh.
Now, we have mentioned that before.
Right.
But yes, and this again ties into what you're saying. You've got men being put in for more and more ridiculous reasons. In this case, being kept, or the potential for men to be kept in. I believe they didn't actually end up keeping any men in, fortunately, but it was actually something that was seriously put on the table,
Right.
which I think is absolutely ridiculous. And it's ridiculous if Kamala Harris didn't know about it. It's a major
Yep.
initiative, then that's inept. So anyway, yes, the US has a prison industry, I think, and unfortunately, other countries may be going that way as well. And it is men who are being churned through the system.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yep. Yep. I would absolutely like to see a system where a small number of prisons are maintained. Most people have alternative forms of punishment, community service, or whatever it happens to be,
Hmm.
with perhaps prison being an alternative to make sure they comply with the other punishments.
Right, right. And in the case where somebody might deserve prison time, maybe they'll probably treat it as free room and board, I suppose. I mean, maybe so there's like the other side of the coin to that.
Well, then that certainly does happen, yeah. And there are certainly people who are so I mean, some of them are down on their luck, so down on their luck, where they are basically, yeah, it's the only time they've got sort of, regular meals and so forth. Yeah, that happens as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some
Yeah.
some mainland European countries take a different approach to
Mhm.
imprisonment, and they have a lower reoffence rate, I believe. Countries like the Netherlands,
Mhm.
I think, but in the English speaking world, it can be pretty harsh. And of course, Australia, it is true, started as a prison colony, and some people have argued that that has reflected in prisons here. So.
Right, absolutely. Also, I'm trying to talk about this while it's fresh in my mind. Like our technology is better too. So
Mm.
even if they were not locked up, they can be still within reason be kept track of, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, right.
And
So,
this can be done. And in fact, what they do, and indeed they do that. It is true that that does happen with
mhm,
ankle bracelets and so forth. But of course, that's a wholly voluntary process, as is bail. I mean, this is the thing. The default condition is imprisonment, and then there are options such as bail, in which a person can, as long as they commit to agree to certain conditions, like might be staying away from their accuser or something like that. They're given the opportunity to bail. And yes, in some cases that's right. And maybe it may have an ankle bracelet. So yes, things like that are already in use. But yes,
mhm,
I think there's certainly a lot more opportunity where, particularly for non-violent offenders, that sort of thing would be a good alternative.
right. So since we're on the subject of Europe, it's on the other hand, it's kind of funny how their justice system seems to work because like a lot of murders that happen in places like say Scandinavia doesn't seem to carry with it like life terms or a lot of death sentences a lot of the time. And I'm not for capital punishment
Mm,
for some serious reasons,
mm,
but but it is kind of noteworthy that because I follow the metal scene, right? And in Scandinavia, the black metal scene is particularly notorious for its some of the murders that happen sometimes among each other, and the fact that
right.
and some would be incarcerated but are let go after a while, like basically I mean one noteworthy one that sticks out is Varg Vikernes, I think his name is,
Mm,
also known as Burzum, his music project,
mm,
killed somebody else in the scene. He claims in self-defense, which is not implausible,
mm.
but he killed another musician, Euronymous. Um, all these crazy names, by the way.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, and he recorded several albums in prison, but is later on released and is continuing to do
So
whatever he does musically. So yeah,
he recorded them while he was in prison.
so he didn't
Wow.
have so the albums he recorded in prison were all ambient music. So because he was only allowed like a keyboard and maybe like a
Right,
program or
right.
something like that. But
Okay.
yeah, but they were albums that he recorded in prison. So
Wow.
yeah,
And I guess he'd have then support crew who could then do stuff with the music that
I
he
suppose, yeah.
records and sends it to them. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and probably that's and that style of music, whether it's black metal or the kind of ambient he does, it's lo-fi anyway, so you can just get away with like really bad equipment.
Right. Okay. Right. No
Hmm.
problem. Yeah. So in general, I'm not into metal. However, there is one guy on YouTube who's takes songs from other genres and does them as metal, and some of those are actually pretty good.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's not unheard of. So yeah,
Mm. Yeah. So
yeah,
that's some of them. I think it's quite clever. But anyway.
yeah, sure. But more to the point, I'm just kind of noting that in Europe, this, you know, killing is kind of, serve your time and then you're on your way, kind of a thing.
Oh, I
I
see what you
could,
mean. So it
yeah,
doesn't carry the stigma afterwards. Perhaps you've paid your sentence to society, and now you can re-enter society, kind of thing.
yeah, that's
Paid
so.
your.
I don't know if those were special cases or anything like that. I don't know if there's different degrees of murder, manslaughter, or whatever.
Probably.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just noting that every time I hear a case about somebody walking after doing their time, it's usually from like places like Sweden or Norway or something. So
Ah, interesting. Yeah, yeah. Um, don't know much about the Nordic legal system. Mainland Europe uses the Code de Napoleon, and as a civil law. I have a feeling that Scandinavia may use that as well. So their system works a little bit differently to ours. But I've also heard some countries, I think one of the Nordic, might be Sweden, has prisons for first-time offenders that are better than other prisons, and they focus more on reform and so forth and rehabilitation. And the idea, I think this has been fairly successful. The idea is that first-time offenders go through these prisons and have a relatively low reoffense rate. But if people return to the system after that, then that's when it starts to get a bit more tough. So there's some interesting ideas out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the English-speaking world, yes, some of our beliefs about the prison system seem to be a bit Byzantine, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So while we're on the topic, though, another interesting one is Portugal, where I don't know, we might have spoken about this once before, where they started treating, it's a little bit off the topic, but they started treating drug problems as more as a medical problem than a criminal problem. And yeah, it's really interesting what happened. I believe that after they introduced this, they still have the legal sanctions, but they kind of use them as a big stick. If people don't go through treatment programs, they can kind of, threaten to incarcerate the person, and that's used to motivate them to stick with the program. But yeah, I believe after they introduced these changes in their system and started pushing people through a medical program rather than straight into jail, there was briefly a rise in the crime rate, and then it started to decline and has continued to decline, at least for a long way. I think it may have stabilized eventually. But the overall net effect appears to have been a significant reduction in the crime rate.
Yeah, that was some good news at the time when I heard it. So yeah.
Exactly, that's right. So, and I find it really interesting that the Portuguese have sort of they've pioneered this system and proved that it works, and pretty much the rest of the world has ignored them rather than considering implementing the system.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Hopefully, the more countries will look at the Portuguese system for drug enforcement in the future.
Yeah, that'll be very good.
Yes, exactly. So that's all I have on women's prisons. I dare say we're going to hear a lot more about this in the future, though.
Yep.
I do have another topic. Did you want to jump in with anything, or shall I just proceed with my...
No, keep going. Yeah.
So... All right, no worries. So this is MONA, the Museum of Old and New Art. And we have talked about this before. It is a private art gallery. I think even though they call themselves a museum, it's really an art gallery, but it is a private art gallery in the Australian state of Tasmania. For those who don't know, not very familiar with Australian geography, Tasmania is an island state in the far south. Gets quite cold by Australian standards. It actually snows at ground level, which pretty much doesn't happen for most of the rest of the country. Relatively small population. It's actually trailed the rest of the country in education level. It was sort of the poor stepchild, if you like, for a while. Where the level of education in the state was really starting to fall significantly behind the rest of the country. I think there's some steps have been taken to address that now. But anyway, and it was also, yeah, it was quite a bit, not a lot poorer, but it was by Australian standards, it was poorer. So anyway. There's a gallery there, and the gallery a little while ago opened up I guess a hall of art with all art in a large room, and said men can't go into the room. Interestingly enough, this is for women only. Interestingly enough, apparently they have male waiters in the room. So yeah, so this is really interesting. So obviously some men are going into the room to work there, but no male patrons. Well, a Tasmanian man took them to court over this a few months ago, and he won.
That's great.
Right. So yeah. So, and I think this is a bit we talked about before.
Yeah. I remember.
So the last time we talked about this, Mona was looking at how they were going to respond to this. They seriously considered redefining the hall where the art was as a ladies' bathroom.
Oh yeah.
Go in. So they were going to put toilet cubicles in there or something. And so until it turned into a bathroom, and then men legally couldn't get in. They looked at a few other things like a women's changing room, I think, and a couple of other things. Anyway, in the end, they actually appealed through the courts, ended up actually, I think the first level was actually an administrative tribunal. So that's basically like a non-court process to keep these things out of the courts. They do have some power, but you can appeal to the courts. And I think this gentleman won at the tribunal, but they've now Mona appealed to a state court. The state court overruled the tribunal, but this I'll get to that in a moment about how they overruled them, which is actually really interesting. But basically, the judge said that because the judge held as an item of truth that women have been historically disadvantaged and oppressed, and that women continue to be disadvantaged and oppressed in modern Australia. And I would fundamentally and vehemently disagree with this. And I would argue, and for the last 11 or so, 12 years, I've been presenting arguments why this isn't true. And I've got quite a body of material at this point. Anyway, I'll actually be right. I'm actually haven't done this yet because I've actually been quite busy the last few weeks, but I'm actually going to write a letter to this judge and talk to him about this, probably an open letter.
Yeah,
and just basically argue, point out to him some flaws in his argument. But interestingly enough, this is where it gets, and I think that I suppose you could say maybe the judge felt that his power didn't extend to actually making a ruling on this, or maybe he was wimping out, just a personal opinion.
right.
But he didn't actually say that men were allowed but men could be restricted into the hall where the art is, right? What he said was that the administrative tribunal had made a mistake and gave these reasons and referred it back to the administrative tribunal to make another ruling. So basically, he's invalidated the first ruling and sent it back to the tribunal for another ruling. And I find this really interesting. It seems to me that he probably could have simply overruled the tribunal, right? But he didn't do that. He sent it back to them. So the tribunal could, in fact, make the same ruling again.
Yeah.
So I find that the fact that he did this really, really interesting. As I said, did he really believe that the state court's power did not extend to overruling the tribunal, which I don't think is the case. As far as I know, that is the courts are able to overrule these tribunals.
Yep.
Or was he kind of wimping out on this and basically, avoiding making a hard ruling and just sending it back to a tribunal and making them do the hard work.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's where we are at the moment. The ruling has actually been overruled. So technically, men are restricted again. I believe that as soon as he made that ruling, that was the case. However, it's now being sent back to the tribunal for them to decide, to re-arbitrate it, basically. So it could be interesting if the tribunal makes the same ruling again. I wonder what happens. Does it just keep bouncing between the courts and the tribunal indefinitely?
Yeah, sounds like something out of a satire.
It does. It really does. Exactly. What if it keeps bouncing back to the same judge and he just keeps sending it back to the tribunal to reevaluate again? Yeah.
Right.
Maybe a different judge would make a different decision. I don't know. But anyway, that's where it is at the moment. So as far as I know, men are not allowed in there again, but it's not a definitive ruling. So we'll see what the decision of the tribunal is. Anyway, in terms of at a personal level, I think this is the way they've been is pretty awful. In fact, I've got some let's see if I have the quotes here, but the one of the people who runs Mona, so she's actually the wife of the man who owns it. And I'm just don't know if I may not have the quotes to hand, but anyway, so there were some what I would call some fairly derogatory quotes towards men that were uttered.
Yeah, we know who's pulling the strings there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So hang on, let me see what I've got here. No, I won't quote her unless I have the exact quote in front of me.
Okay.
Which I really did think that I had there, but in any case, probably in a future episode I will I'll raise those. But anyway, I thought some of them were derogatory, so towards men, which I think is probably in my view, is just probably trolling, and it's probably just an attempt to rile up men, which I think. I don't know what you think about this, Vernon, but I think by and large that fails. When faced with hostility from women, so a lot of feminists used to talk about the backlash. This is a
Yeah.
this is a term that's largely fallen out of use now, but decades ago they used to talk about the backlash. They believed that there will be a backlash against feminism from men. Okay,
Mhm.
and I believe the backlash. I think it's pretty clear the backlash of the type that they were describing never happened.
No, no.
Right. When faced with hostility from from women, and the potential to be in conflict with women, most men will simply disengage.
Yes,
And
this,
that's
yeah.
right. And that's exactly what's happened.
Hmm.
So a large number of men are disengaged for a wide variety of reasons, one of which is the hostility from feminism. Anyway, so I think some of the quotes that I'll go through later talk about really a sort of, I think, as an attempt to rile up men, but I still think they're fundamentally misunderstanding the way that men will respond to this sort of thing. And by and large, some men will get a little angry and so forth, but most men will simply disengage.
Yeah, absolutely. They're mad that that we're not backlashing properly enough.
Yes, and it doesn't. It really annoys them. It really
Hmm.
does. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. That's right. Yep.
Hmm. Right.
So yeah, let's do more of that then. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
So anyway, that's the Museum of Old and New Art, Mona. As I said, I've never been to Tasmania. I plan to go one day, and
Mhm.
because there's other things to see on the island.
Okay.
But I will most definitely be skipping the Museum of Old and New Art.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And by the way, say hi to the Tasmanian Devil.
Yes, yes. So
Yeah.
yes, that is exactly the only place they exist in the world. So a lot of
Mhm.
people don't know this, but the Tasmanian Devil used to exist across the entire Australian continent until about 4,000 years ago. And then the dingo arrived because dingoes, as placental mammals, are not native to Australia,
Mhm.
and they arrived about 4,000 years ago. Within a fairly short space of time, the Tasmanian Devil had disappeared from mainland Australia and only
Yeah.
remains in the state of Tasmania.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. They're weird looking creatures, kind of a cross between a rabid dog and a bear. And
They're,
yeah.
and I've seen them in Australian zoos and so forth, and they
Mhm.
really are strange. They're always like the old Looney Tunes cartoon.
Yeah.
They're always
Mhm.
moving. And I think that's what gave them the inspiration because they're
Mhm.
always moving.
Mhm.
While we're on the topic, actually, have you ever heard of? You probably haven't. Devil facial tumor disease.
No, I've not heard that one.
So Tasmanian devils actually are suffering from a very serious condition at the moment. It is a transmissible cancer. So not in the case of human papillomavirus or something where the virus is transmissible and it can give you cancer. This is a cancer which is actually transmissible from one animal to another in the same species. It's one of only two that exist as far as I'm aware. And unfortunately, what happens is transmitted through bites, and they have they often, I think particularly the males will often bite each other, but
Yeah.
it affects males and females. And they are I think about half of them are actually impacted by this at the moment. And there's actually a very real possibility they're working on addressing it, but there's a very real possibility they may go extinct in the wild in Tasmania because it's that bad.
Mhm.
So for about 20 or 30 years, the Australian government has actually been locating what they call arc populations on the mainland because there are no devils on the mainland, right? And they actually have a number of these where they're keeping animals, Tasmanian devils, which do not have the disease, isolated. In the event that they actually go extinct in the wild, they will actually reintroduce them after the extinction event, so to repopulate Tasmania.
Mhm.
So yeah, so hopefully they don't go extinct in the wild, but it's actually a very real possibility because they have a
Yep.
transmissible cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So poor old
Yeah.
devils.
Absolutely. I'm seeing that they've been classified endangered since 2008. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
whereas
yeah.
traditionally they were not endangered at all. It's only
Mhm.
since, as far as I know, it's only since the advent of this disease. Exactly. Prior to that, they were relatively common in Tasmania.
Mhm.
Yes, they're in quite serious trouble now. But yeah, so hopefully we don't see the end of them in the wild. But if we do, there is a plan
Yeah.
to reintroduce them.
Absolutely. Yep.
And have you ever heard of the Tasmanian tiger?
No, I have not.
Okay, so the Tasmanian tiger, also known as the thylacine, was or is an animal that existed only in Tasmania. It looked a bit like a small dog, but it had stripes, so that's where it got this nickname, that it was named the Tasmanian Tiger. They were officially they were hunted to extinction. In the last one dying in 1928, I think it was 1920s. I think it was 28 in a zoo in Tasmania. However, Tasmania, about half the island is dense bushland and it is a
Mhm.
national park, and all sorts of things can go on. It's very, very remote and very rugged and very mountainous.
Mhm.
And uh, there's been a persistent rumor that the Tasmanian tiger may have survived in remote areas, and even the Tasmanian state government has admitted this might actually be true. So I'm really hoping
Yeah.
it is true, and
Yeah.
that one day, sooner or later, somebody finds a Tasmanian tiger, even hopefully a small population,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's been
Yeah.
nearly 100 years since the last time they were seen. But it is actually plausible. Tasmania is so rugged and so parts of it are so remote that it is actually plausible that humans haven't seen them or that nobody's been able to take a photograph in 100 years. But
Right.
with everybody carrying cameras these days, if I would imagine in the next 10 to 20 years, if they're out there, we'll probably get a picture. I would say if we haven't seen a picture in the next 10 to 15, 20 years, they're probably not there.
Okay. Well,
But
now that
I
I'm
would
looking
hope,
at it, yeah, now that I'm looking at it, I do recognize the species and
right.
how it
Yes,
was
yes,
thought to have been
yes.
extinct. Yeah.
You've probably seen pictures and documentaries which would
Mm.
show that footage of the last one in the zoo. And yeah,
Maybe, yeah,
exactly.
mostly
Yeah.
pictures, but yeah.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of Tasmania, actually,
Okay.
there's the topic of the Tasmanian Aborigines. And this is really interesting, actually. So I was taught when I was a kid, okay.
Mhm.
So to be clear, Tasmania's been isolated from the mainland for about 10,000 years.
Yeah.
So the Tasmanian Aborigines were isolated for an extended period of time because once the sea levels rose about 10,000 years ago, the technology to travel between the mainland and Tasmania did not exist. And so the Aborigines there became isolated. Their languages, branched off into a completely different direction and so forth. Their technology was significant. The argument is that their technology was significantly lower than mainland Aborigines. Anyway, the when I was at school, I was taught that there was a massacre. Well, there was a massacre. That bit was true, but there was a massacre, and all Tasmanian Aborigines were wiped out. They were completely. It was a genocide, and they were
Hmm.
gone. Okay. And then when I was in my 20s or late teens or something like that, I heard a media report about a gentleman who was descended from Tasmanian Aborigines. And I'm thinking, could have sworn they said there were none, that they were
Right.
completely wiped
Yeah.
out. Right. So it is true there was a genocide, or an attempted, I should say, attempted genocide. They actually attempted to walk across the island and basically shoot the Tasmanian Aborigines. Fortunately, many Europeans were quite sympathetic to them and objected to this idea of genocide and evacuated them. And so a number of them, I think possibly in the thousands, were evacuated. And they end up putting them on other islands and so forth. And they did survive. But anyway, I just want to make this point. Even today, you hear Australians say that there were no Tasmanian Aborigines left. There are, because there are descendants who are alive today, and there are people who speak who have remnants of the old ancient Tasmanian Aboriginal languages and so forth. Just wanted to mention it, that there are a
Yeah.
lot of people don't know that there are actually descendants of Tasmanian Aborigines, but it is true that there was an attempt to wipe them out. But yeah, fortunately, there were missionaries and others who managed to get them off the Tasmania and unlocate them elsewhere. But anyway, yeah, so they do survive to this day, despite what I was taught when I was a kid, and what a lot of other people in Australia have been told.
Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah. So interesting though that this idea that there was that they were completely wiped out, and I think everyone was taught that in Australian schools decades ago, and it's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
um, yeah, that's probably all I have on Tasmania for the moment.
Okay.
As I said, I haven't personally been there, but I will be going there at some stage, maybe over
Mm.
the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Uh, and yes, that's all I have. Apart from Zoe McLellan, who I always mention.
Yeah, sure. One thing I want to point out is that, you seem to do a lot of traveling. How do you do it all the time? Like it seems so easy for you.
It's funny. I don't. well, okay, you know what, that's at times I've done a lot of traveling. This last year, I was actually thinking about this. I've had 5 international trips in the last 14 months. I think that's the
Mhm.
most I've ever had. Well, I will have the next one is coming up is Japan. That's the most I've ever had. Yeah, I mean, I lived overseas for a number of years and did travel a bit. But yeah, I found opportunities to go to different places. I've been to every inhabited continent. The only continent I haven't been to is Antarctica.
Right.
But I've only been to about 25 countries or something like that. But I've been quite fortunate in that they have
Yes.
been spread all around the world.
You know, if the way things keep on going, Antarctica might be the best place to safely hold an international conference for men's issues.
That's issues. We might have to do. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so fun
Yeah.
fact: I
Yeah.
actually applied to go to Antarctica when I
Mm-hmm.
was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So, Australia has 4 bases in Antarctica, 3 on the Antarctic mainland, and another on a place called Macquarie Island, which oddly enough is part of the state of Tasmania, even though it's in an Antarctic island. For some reason, it's actually considered part of the state. Anyway, that's not normally the case, but for some reason they did it that way. But there are 4 bases. I actually did apply to go, so if I'd ever gone, I would have been able to say I've been to all the continents. But they lost my application, so
Oh, well, yeah.
and I ended up doing something else. I ended up joining the police instead. I wanted to do something different in my life and try
Mm.
something I hadn't tried before. So
Okay,
uh,
so for you, it was either policeman or go to
yeah,
Antarctica.
or I'll go to Antarctica.
Okay.
Exactly. That's right. That really was
Okay.
it really was the choice. Yeah. I just wanted to go do
Okay.
something completely different and sort of,
Okay.
test my limits, as it were.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So,
right.
yep. But anyway, so I never got to Antarctica. I've toyed with the idea that I might yet go. So
Mm-hmm.
I might yet to apply. I may yet
Mm-hmm.
apply again. So we'll
Mm-hmm.
see how it goes.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it'd be nice. The only thing is, I think you can't control which base you go to. So that means, in the case of an Australian, you could apply, get accepted into the program, and end up on Macquarie Island and never end up on the Antarctic mainland. Whereas I would really
Mm.
want to go to the mainland.
Right. Yeah.
So in contrast, New Zealand has 1 base there, I think. And of course, US may have several, but that US has got McMurdo base, which is quite famous and quite a large base actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The,
Yeah.
yeah. So the New Zealand one is very close to McMurdo, I believe. They're only a few kilometers apart, which is actually kind of nice, I guess. It means people in the New Zealand base can then go over to McMurdo. Bit of
Mm.
socializing.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, yes, it's an interesting place, Antarctica. I think it's Chile and Argentina have tried to claim parts of Antarctica as national territory, but nobody else is having it.
Yeah.
And they actually send, I don't know if they're still doing it, but for a while they would send military officers who had pregnant wives, they would
Mhm.
fly them down to Antarctica so that the wives would give birth in a base in Antarctica because it would give them a better claim to make it national
Yeah.
territory because people were having kids there.
That's that's hysterical.
Yes. So I don't know if they're still doing that, but for a number of decades, they actually used
Mhm.
to do that anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Um, yeah. So that's all I have.
Okay. I do have one thing. So so recently I posted an article Anatomy of an Eel on A Voice for Man. And that was basically about,
Hmm.
the premise of the article is basically about, is man meant to live on their knees? And I think most of us know what that's all about, even beyond just the whole proposal stuff, the kneeling to women sort of thing. I speak more broadly
Yeah.
about man's place in on the world. Even though I still do use the genuflecting for women thing as kind of like a popular example. But one thing I've noticed is that uh, almost all the feedback I've gotten, well, which I'm still grateful that anyone reads the article at all, but is that people seem to take that this is all this is about,
Yeah.
about genuflecting to women, as opposed to more of genuflect as a bad
Uh,
concept altogether.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. So it's not just that we're doing it to women. That's the bad thing. Is it not just that? It's the
yes.
fact. Yeah, right. So, and I think many people are missing that and may not actually be reading the article. So I please ask you to read it more carefully.
Yeah, I wonder too if people are just they are reading it, but they're still just assuming and reading into it what they want what they're expecting rather than what you're actually saying. Which, as soon as you said, it, I realized what you were getting at. Yes, it's a much broader concept. Exactly, it could be kneeling to a king, for example.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, right. Which,
that's right.
I'm a big, individualist, libertarian, what have you. You know the drill. So,
Yeah,
and but it's not just because I have these views I'm saying this. I seriously believe that um, uh, a life of genuflect, no matter what your idol is
mm,
not good for you. It's not good for men. It's not even
yes,
good for women, but it's definitely not good for men because this is the normalized stuff in society here. So yeah, that's really what I'm trying to get at. And it's not bad for women, but good for something else too. That's not the point I'm making at all. So if that's what you think, the takeaway is read it again. Better
yeah.
yet, read it the first time.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. It's not just that. That's right. In terms of the
Mhm.
genuflecting to
Yeah.
women, it is a much broader problem than that. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
very
Kind of.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Because
think that's
we were talking about how feminists wanted to make men basically their backlashing puppets, kind of making them kind of do a little dance, right? And that metaphor extends to here, even though beyond the whole bending the knee thing, kind of genuflect by doing exactly what they tell you, kind of putting you into a position of submission here. And when men don't do that, because they're just choosing to disengage and walk away, that in itself is a way of standing up and for yourself and just doing your own thing. So you can extend the
yes.
metaphor in that way.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's right, exactly. Sometimes the force opposing you is too great to fight against. That can
Hmm.
certainly happen. In which case, disengaging and walking away,
Hmm.
even sometimes if you're still there physically because they're forcing you to stay,
Yeah.
yes, even mentally disengaging and keeping
Yeah.
that distance. Yeah,
Mhm.
people can do what they need to do to maintain their own integrity and their own yeah.
Yeah, sure. And what's been happening as of late in the political world too, like bending the knee for some political cause that is not exactly uh worthy at all, basically. I'm not saying that anything is, but it's like like athletes kind of taking the knee to like the national anthem, or and all,
Yes.
all the stuff about the post George Floyd thing where
Mm.
politicians are bending the knee. So there's something about that is trying to seek out virtue signaling by
Mm.
self-abasement, by going on their knees and so forth.
Yes, yes, and it does come across as virtue signaling to me too.
Hmm.
Absolutely, that's
Yeah,
right.
right.
There are a lot of things. If you believe there's a particular problem in society, by all means, work towards resolving that problem.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
a lot of people were much more content to just virtue signal and yes,
Hmm.
do some do some public performance rather than doing something that will actually make a difference.
Hmm. Right, exactly. And and there are public performances that are great, I think,
Mm.
but there are some that are not good, which is anything that makes them look like small on behalf of something else. That's the
Yes,
way I see it.
yes, no, I agree.
Mhm.
Uh yes.
And
So
that's all I got. So yeah,
no problem. No worries. All right. Yes, I've got Zoe McLellan to finish up with. If we, yep, we don't have any
yeah,
other
we're good.
topics.
We're good.
Cool. So, as of September, no, what are we in? October 2024, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McLellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McLellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McLellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McLellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McLellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any relevant information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. And as I noted in the last episode, plans are underway to get some information onto Costa Rica related sites in Spanish.
Yes.
So we can raise awareness there if she is there, because that would certainly explain something why she hasn't surfaced. If she was in the US or Canada, I would expect she would probably have surfaced. So if she's somewhere like Costa Rica and they're not aware of what's going on, that could explain it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Catch you next time.
Talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Yes. Bye.